Hi, I'm Chris from Airwindows, and hey, you can imitate a transformer in your DAW like this. Let's turn up the cheapness of the transformer. We're running fairly hot into it. So, what do we have going here? Well, let's shut off the imitation transformer for a moment because we're running into it rather hot. And I'll tell you what we're up to with this. This is Coils2. Coils2 is the follow-up version of a plugin that I did a while back called Coils, which was a transformer emulation plugin that was kind of similar to stuff that I do like distortion and focus and such. It was a bit of the inverse of focus in that focus would take a mid-range band and distort only that and leave everything else unmodified, whereas what Coils does is it takes the mid-range band and leaves it clean and lets everything else pass through and go into a distortion. What Coils2 adds to this is that it is acting kind of asymmetrical. It's modeling a thing called hysteresis, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, which means you magnetize the core slightly so that it lingers a little bit. The exact details not all that important. We're going to fool around with it a little bit. And I'll also take a moment to mention right up front, I didn't have a plugin last week. And the reason I didn't have a plugin last week is because I was working on porting stuff to the new Apple Macintoshes. I was porting 248 plugins to the new M1 chip, and also learning how to make them code signed. So I'm done. Everything's all done. Coils2 will also come out as M1 compatible. All of the previous plugins are also M1 compatible, and you can also download them in a format where they are all code signed now. So that'll put an end to all the fooling around in terminal, all the Catalina stuff, all that do this in order to make it see your plugins. No, it's just plain work. That's kind of how it's supposed to go. So I have done the things requiring that, and with a bit of luck, everything's going to work just fine. So let's get back to fooling around with this plugin that you can see. So as you can see, I can turn it on. Now here's what's going on. We've got this saturation control, and we've got a cheapness control. And my voice is actually passing through all this at the same time, so you're going to kind of hear what it does. Saturation is the intensity of the distortion on this, the extremes of what the transformer can do. Like extremely low bass doesn't want to pass through a transformer, so if you're making low bass noises, but then you have the cheapness turned up and you're saturating it a lot, what you're going to get is a more mid-rangey sound. And it's also going to roll off highs because you can't put highs through a transformer at extremely high levels. It's going to tend to focus down in the mid-range to some extent. And that's basically how this works. Note that this is not a boost in order to get dirt plugin, especially given the way the saturation works. The saturation dials in a sound. So if we have maximum effect of it, this is relatively undistorted with those extremes, but the more we push it, pushing it harder and harder to the point of ridiculous. And now what you're hearing is basically just the clean mid-range that passes through. You're saturating. This is modeling the transformer being obliterated so hard that the only thing it can really do is pass through its sort of resonant frequencies as intensely as possible. Bear in mind that this cheapness is the tightness of the resonance, so we can dial this back and you start hearing more. We're still getting rid of the extreme lows. We're still getting rid of the extreme highs, but when we've got it set this way, saturation up as high as it can possibly go, you're basically not getting any of the transformer modeling as far as the crunchy, colorful stuff that you get out of a more median setting. And again, turn it up all the way. It's not going to give you maximum grind. It's going to give you maximum focus on whatever frequency the cheapness value is set to. And if you've got it focused right down to a really narrow, it's essentially working like a tiny transformer with a garbage core this way. It can barely pass anything through, whereas if you have cheapness all the way to the other extreme, that's like a giant expensive transformer such as you'd have in a good preamplifier or a good mixing desk or whatever. The comparable things in guitar amplifiers, if you were using this to try to get a guitar sound to sound more like a real thing. Extremely high cheapness would be a transformer much smaller than it would need to be some little cheap amplifiers. Slightly less cheapness is going to get you your Marshall style sound. And as you go beyond that, you get into a Fender style sound where the transformers are kind of bigger and heavier, and the resulting amplifier is more intense as far as the peaks and stuff it'll put out. And then you go all the way to the most open setting, and the guitar amplifier model that you get from that would be along the lines of a high watt, because high watts were notable for having huge high power handling transformers and producing extremely punchy transient sound. So you'd have minimum cheapness for high watt, a little bit more for Fender, a little bit more for like your Marshalls and such. Mesa Boogie would be around here somewhere. And then smaller and smaller for like your little tiny cheap Fender Champs or whatever. And that's how that works. Let's fool around just a little bit with some guitar sounds specifically. And turn the microphone back on again. So if I turn it off, it sounds like this. And then, like we said, we don't want to use full saturation, so what we do is get into this zone where we still have some of the detail here, but we're saturating it just a bit. Tell you what, let's also mute, let's mute that reverb just a bit. So without any Coils2, what we've got is this, and this is a real amplifier, mind you. It's a heavily modified Epiphone Valve Jr. But if we wanted to throw in something that acted a little bit more like a... I'm just skipping around so that I can keep it going. Turn this on. And we can dial in more saturation. Pretend this is the output transformer. And then as we go to more cheapness, we can maybe saturate it a little bit less if we want, or we're going to get into a more sort of Marshally tone-shaped sound rather than just all spiky Fendery. Or a more spiky Fendery kind of thing. We can push it harder. And again, we can get into a kind of zone where we're just pushing into extreme distortion. Here we're running a Marshall stack into a Fender Champ output transformer. Never do that. And then over here is your high watt zone. And again, remember the way this works. If you've got a very high cheapness, meaning that you're getting the full amount of effect here, saturation will increase until you're starting to hear the crunch of it. But if you turn it up all the way, you don't get more, you get less. Now you're hearing only the mids that pass through, and you're not really getting the effect of the saturation anymore. So treat this basically like saturation is set up so that if you have it turned up this high, you are absolutely abusing the sound. It's completely unreasonable. And around here, it's maybe a little more plausible. As you lower the cheapness, we also start to get into a zone where the mid-range that's passing through is wider, so there's less of the distorted part to be worried about. And so you'd use more saturation to hear an effect from that. Also, you can think of it in the way of the less the cheap of the transformer, the more resilient it is to get slammed by high levels. And again, we can just kind of dial it in until it's doing what we want tonally. And then we shut it off. And that's just the raw input. That is a decent microphone on a speaker cabinet. This is the real sound. And this is somewhat conditioned. And then it's muted there for a second. We can throw the whole band back on again. And the reverb. And for that, what we can do if we're running a whole mix through it is we behave as if it is a real recording console. We have the cheapness a lot less because we're not pretending that we're a garbage recording console. And then the saturation is a little more just so that it has an effect. But we could also play like we're on extremely pricey gear and dial both of those things back a little bit. Cheapness will go down to about maybe 0.2 or so, and saturation can go up because there's very little left for it to do. So that's a good hot mix level through what would be that would be kind of like running through an expensive console. What that would sound like without coils there is this. And of course, if we were going to shut off all of the Airwindows stuff so that we're no longer running console at all, the raw DAW version of that would sound like this. Except for not really, because I'm using console for the levels, so never mind that. I was doing that wrong. Here, let's turn these things back on again, and that's what it would sound like with the console system working properly. And Coils back in here. Just in case they can't hear that very clearly, because it's set up to be an expensive transformer, let's make it really cheap. So, very cheap transformer and no fake transformer. And I think that basically does it. So, like I said before, here, hang on a second. I'm going to go back to our main camera. So, yeah, I'm a little bit out of practice because I've been compiling so many plugins, but Coils2 is Patreon supported, so it's free. Download it, go ahead and use it. If you think it is absolutely incredible and also you like having 248 plugins available for the new Macs, you can jump on my Patreon. And if you would buy Coils2 as a separate plugin for $50 a pop to own forever, and also you get the source code, it's a fairly generous deal. The copy protection is, shall we say, lenient. Then just throw $50 a year towards the Patreon if you would like. You don't have to. You can go ahead and use it without it. See if it's worth that to you. And if I have done something else that you like a year from now, then you can keep that $50 there. We'll see. It's going pretty well, I got to say. The one thing that's happening with the Patreon is I have cleared the goal where I'm starting to accumulate money that's going to be used to send people electronic parts. And I've begun to do Wednesday DIY synth making streams. Now, this happened earlier than I was expecting, so I'm still getting together the stuff for doing it. I might actually spend some time like playing with VCV Rack or something to show people the concepts of how one builds synthesizers from parts, because it does kind of translate. But yeah, we are on this journey and we'll see where it takes us. So on that note, thanks for bearing with me. It's fun doing this kind of thing. I hope you like Coils2. It's a little bit like Srsly and Srsly 2 in that Srsly, the first one, was very subtle. And it has its uses, but it didn't do the wild, incredible, intense things people might have been looking for. And by the same token, Coils is still a kind of transformer simulator, but it's also very subtle, and it didn't do like the intense, crazy things that people might have been seeking from your analog simulation things. Well, I think we got that taken care of, because Coils2 can be set up to be really intense. Remember, saturation is not about overdriving it like you would a stompbox. Saturation is setting sort of where the nonlinearities in the transformer kick in, and it's never designed to be like stomp it into overload so much as it's just tone shaping for where stuff begins to distort. And the cheapness is kind of how mid-rangey and limited the transformer is. I think cheapness is a good description for that. So, thanks for your attention, and I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.